By the time I reached the ridge, the wind had sharpened into a biting edge, slicing through the layers I thought would keep me warm. The mountains stretched in endless gray folds, their peaks jagged against a bruised sky. But the villages below were swallowed by a silence so complete it pressed against my ears. Every abandoned doorway and shuttered window felt like a witness to something unspeakable, yet no one had lived here long enough to confirm it. My boots crunched over frost-hardened earth, each step a small rebellion against the void. It was in that silence that I first saw the traces. Enormous footprints pressed into the mud, each step a reminder of scale I could scarcely reconcile. The prints led toward a narrow gorge, shadows pooling along its edges, light trembling against the walls like a hesitant witness. I ran my gloved fingers along the impression, the cold biting through, and noted the depth, well over a foot, and the width, wider than any human boot I'd ever cataloged. My journal recorded them immediately. Valley floor, 740, 2 local. Impressions consistent with 12, 14-foot stature. Soil displacement remarkable. Partial claw impressions noted. Even the act of writing felt almost sacrilegious in the hush of the mountains. Every instinct screamed to pull back, yet curiosity drew me further. The interplay of shadow and light became my silent guide, the fading sun casting shapes that danced across the rocky faces, exaggerating size and mystery. From a distance, a column of fog rose from the gorge, curling like smoke from a hidden fire, but no warmth met my skin. I knew the soldiers' logs would call it wind or dust, but my eyes registered something heavier, something deliberate. The valley seemed to hold its breath, and I felt its caution mirror my own. I photographed what I could, a series of images capturing nothing and everything at once. Shadows elongated across the mud, a branch bent unnaturally, an impression where no branch should have moved. The motif of shadow and light threaded through every frame, a pattern I could not yet interpret, but could not ignore. Even my satellite overlays later that evening confirmed anomalies, voids in vegetation that coincided with the tracks, shapes too regular, too precise to be natural. Every note and image became a quiet ledger of possibility, a receipt against my own disbelief. The mountains whispered a warning, but I had already stepped past the threshold, and the deeper truth was waiting just beyond the ridge. By dawn, the valley had emptied into a pale, indifferent light, yet the chill lingered, curling around my spine with a quiet insistence. The footprints from yesterday had partially frozen over, but their scale still defied reason, and my disbelief clashed with an urgent curiosity I couldn't suppress. I had flown over these same ridges countless times, each mission a catalog of routine reconnaissance, but now the familiar terrain felt alien, its shadows heavier, its silences more insistent. I replayed the memory of the previous night, how the wind had carried a low, almost rhythmic thrum across the cliffs, subtle enough that any soldier might have dismissed it, yet insistent enough to stir unease. Every detail, cracked stone, displaced earth, the curling fog, contrasted sharply with my previous understanding of operational risk. Past missions had been ordered, predictable, and contained. Now, the parameters were gone. Control versus one. Chaos pressed in from all sides. Later, back at the forward operating base, a briefing arrived on my secure tablet marked Classified, Unsanctioned Encounters. I stared at the header, the words scrawled in digital red against a gray interface, and the open loop of authority versus secrecy snapped into focus. Notes referenced anomalous activity without providing explanation, as if acknowledging the impossible while demanding obedience. I thumbed through satellite overlays and field logs attached as PDFs, some images deliberately blurred, others marked with cryptic annotations. Verify at discretion. The quiet hum of the servers filled the room, a persistent, almost mocking silence that mirrored the empty villages below. My mind toggled between rational analysis and instinctual alarm. Each footprint, each shadow, each anomaly became a datum in a ledger I hadn't known I was keeping, a ledger that insisted on acknowledgement despite my desire to remain grounded. I scribbled thoughts in my notebook. Displacement of mass in gorge, confirmed. Scale beyond known human limits. Environmental impact, measurable but unrecorded officially. The juxtaposition of what I could verify against what the military chose to leave unsaid pressed a weight across my chest. Disbelief and curiosity were no longer companions. They were opposing forces pulling me forward, deeper into the unknown. And yet the valley's silence offered both warning and invitation. Back then, Afghanistan had been a map of coordinates, not memories. We spoke in grids, not villages. In operations, not lives. My unit, Reconnaissance Task Group 415, attached to the 173rd Airborne, operated out of a forward base near Kandahar province between April 2011 and February 2012. The protocols were clear. Identify, report, neutralize. Anything beyond that was a deviation, and deviations were career-ending. We'd been trained to see what could be measured: heights, heat signatures, metallic densities, but not what stood outside the boundaries of logic. Now, standing in the same valleys years later, I could feel how the terrain had outgrown its coordinates. The land was unchanged, but everything else, our certainties, our arrogance, had eroded. The contrast between then and now was almost surgical. Then, the silence between radio transmissions meant efficiency. Now, it felt like omission. The higher we climbed, the more our old systems of order thinned out. The figures, those immense shapes glimpsed between cloud and cliff, didn't fit any operational model. And yet the briefings I'd recovered from archives implied that someone, somewhere, had already factored them in. The realization settled like a stone in my chest. This wasn't discovery. It was rediscovery. I traced back the command chain. Captain Rourke, my former commanding officer, had been a pragmatist with a careful disdain for rumor. His reports were surgical in tone, concise, sterile, but one entry dated the 17th of May 2011 had been quietly redacted in the declassified files. The page that followed bore a single sentence typed in courier font: "Non-standard biological entities, visual confirmation pending." I'd known Rourke to write with precision, never ambiguity, which made that line stand out more than anything. The deeper I dug, the more the motives surfaced. Fear of exposure wasn't paranoia, it was policy. Any admission that the U.S. military had encountered entities beyond conventional biology would fracture command credibility. Shadow operatives, civilian analysts embedded under the Office of Historical Integrity, appeared repeatedly across the chain of communications. Their job, ostensibly, was archival verification, but I knew the tone of containment when I read it. One memo from OHI Analyst 7 Delta stated, "Maintain containment posture. Public corroboration risk unacceptable." Even the logistics confirmed the stakes. There were missing supply requisitions from the 2nd of June 2011, listing reinforced cargo containers with no destination field. I remembered the convoy that disappeared into the southern pass that week. 4 trucks, one returning empty. Back then I didn't question it. Now, I can't stop. Fear of operational failure explains most silences. A commander's instinct is preservation, of order, of reputation, of the narrative. But what happens when the truth refuses to stay buried beneath the protocols that protect it? Standing again on that terrain, I realized the real risk had never been exposure to the enemy. It was exposure to ourselves. And somewhere behind those sealed reports and blurred images, I could sense the outline of something vast and waiting. Its presence written between the lines of every official denial. By dusk, the light over the valley fractured into copper and ash, the kind of sky that looked both bruised and burning. The base generators hummed behind me in measured rhythm, but inside, my thoughts refused the order they demanded. Control had always been my discipline, yet that evening, it felt more like a cage. The protocol said to log, not linger, to submit findings through encrypted channels and await review. But silence from command had become its own kind of noise, a static that hid the truth I could no longer ignore. The decision came quietly, without ceremony. I would investigate, off-grid, off-record. I locked my quarters from the inside, laid out the artifacts I'd gathered. High-resolution satellite captures showing distortion in the terrain, field reports flagged for anomalous energy readings, and the blurred photographs I'd taken myself. Under the lamp, the images reflected back like secrets behind glass. I ran my thumb along a brass keychain I'd carried since Kandahar, its worn edge catching light, an old habit for luck, or maybe for courage. Tonight it became something else, a reminder that keys don't just open doors, they confirm you're meant to enter. I built my map from fragments, timestamps cross-referenced with intercepted transmissions, grid overlays layered until the valley's outline glowed faintly on the screen. The coordinates formed a triangle that shouldn't have existed according to topographic records. 3 sites, all marked as cleared villages, now erased from active databases. The pattern itself was a kind of key. Control versus chaos had always been my internal battle, but this time, chaos carried the truth. I knew what stepping past the threshold meant: surveillance risk, disciplinary action, the possible end of my clearance. Yet the alternative, obedience without understanding, felt like a quieter kind of death. The moment stretched, dusk deepening into full dark, until decision became motion. I encrypted copies of the data to an untraceable drive, concealed them under a decoy folder labeled Inventory Logs Q2. Sometimes you reach a point where waiting is no longer safety, it's surrender, and so I moved. As I powered down the terminal, the lamp flickered once, casting the brass key's shadow across the desk, a narrow beam of light cutting through everything I thought I knew. Have you ever faced the impossible and had to choose your next step? Because in that moment, mine led directly into the dark, and the truth was waiting on the other side. I kept my headset off until I needed it. The hum of the bass felt less like comfort and more like interference. The plan began as a list and became choreography. Calls, cross-checks, photographic forensics, encrypted threads routed through dead channels. Secrecy versus transparency sat on the table between us like a physical weight, heavy and insistently warm. I dialed the first contact at 2:14 on the drive. Major Reyes, a SIGINT analyst I trusted because she trusted data over drama. Her voice was quiet, efficient. She asked for raw captures and returned exacting questions instead of comfort. We traded timestamps and hypotheses until the outline of activity glowed on my screen. The intercepted communications arrived in fragments over 3 days. The 9th of April 2025, 21:03 UTC. The 11th of April 2025, 3:47 UTC. And April 12, 2025, 18:22 UTC. Each packet was short, the kind of terse telemetry that might be dismissed in a larger stream. But Reyes pulled carrier hops and burst lengths into a visualization that suggested directed movement, repeated bursts from a narrow sector, not the scatter of wildlife chatter. She forwarded a technical readout, carrier hop analysis, 425, PDF, and highlighted anomalies where signal attenuation patterns matched thermal voids I'd seen in field imagery. Timing mattered. These bursts clustered around local dawn and dusk, the same light bands where the valley produced the deepest shadows. Document cross-checking was less glamorous than covert raids. I mapped decades-old logistics spreadsheets against current fuel requisitions and convoy manifests. REQ 201-10602 XLSX listed 4 reinforced containers. Their destination field was redacted. CONVOYLOG 201100603 PDF showed one vehicle returning with a blank manifest. Small frictions surfaced in the margins. A 2-hour gate delay logged at 9:12 on the 2nd of June 2011. An unexplained maintenance hold for a Humvee posted to Unit, Maint, 2011, log, and a paycard transaction at 10:04 for a roadside mechanic that matched neither route nor record. Bureaucratic noise became breadcrumb trail. Each clerical hiccup a minor truth in a ledger of omission. Photo analysis consumed the dark hours. I layered high-resolution frames with thermal overlays, adjusting contrast until false positives fell away. Fieldshot_2025-10-28.jpg, when run through edge detection, revealed linear impressions in shadow that aligned with my footprint measurements. I annotated the file. FIELDSHOT 2025-1028 ANNOTATED PSD and exported cropped segments for Reyes. The motif of shadow and light felt literal. Absence of light often carried as much information as its presence. Night vision logs, NV, LOG 425, SEQ, showed static at precise moments that matched the carrier bursts. The technical overlay read like a ledger of where darkness had been manufactured, not incidental. Encrypted message review was its own choreography. I seeded decoy traffic through disposable keys, rotated ciphers twice, and used an air-gapped drive to store clean copies. Messages carrying the best leads arrived with headers like OHI, Note, 2011, Read and Anon, Field, 425, MSG. Their language was clinical, but pointed. Containment posture recommended. Do not engage. One unsigned fragment referenced. Site integrity compromise. Priority retrieval. That line read like both instruction and confession. It hinted at retrievals that had happened fast and quietly, and at people who had chosen continuity over disclosure. Then came the pattern interrupt, a private investigator's report that contradicted military logs. PI, report, Oct 2025. PDF landed in my secure inbox at 6/8 on the 30th of October 2025. The investigator, Farah, had been hired quietly by a family connected to one of the missing convoy drivers. Her timeline placed the convoy at a different pass entirely, and her GPS track, corroborated by a fuel receipt and a camera timestamp from a roadside vendor, showed an extra stop not logged in official manifests. Where the military file had a blank, her evidence had a name and a face. A driver who swore he'd seen a shadow move like a thing with intent. Farah's human detail cut through bureaucratic flatness. Her compassion made the omission feel deliberate, not accidental. I compiled everything into a single encrypted dossier. Dossier, Valley, Master, in C. The file was dense with metadata and heavier in implication. Keys, literal and figurative, had surfaced inside those artifacts. A brass keychain photographed in a convoy photo, a decoy folder named Inventory Logs Q2, a mechanic's receipt stamped the 2nd of June 2011, a PI's GPS track layered over an official convoy route. Each key unlocked a different question. As the night deepened, the plan sharpened into something surgical. Verify what the logs aired in hiding, document it beyond doubt, present a file that would force transparency without playing into the system that had buried the first answers. Transparency, I decided, required relentless secrecy, and so I sealed the dossier, set the drive in a dead drop, and prepared to proceed. The first time I saw it, the light didn't move, it withdrew. A column of dusk folding inward, shadow reshaping itself into something vast. I steadied the lens against a rock, pulse ticking too loudly in my ears. Calm and adrenaline are supposed to cancel each other out, but they don't. They braid into something sharper. Through the viewfinder, the mountain slope seemed to breathe. The silhouette rose higher than the tree line, shoulders indistinct but undeniably structured, too deliberate for weather, too slow for machinery. My telemetry unit pinged a reading. Thermal void, 40 meters long, intermittent movement, altitude consistent with 7,800 feet. I whispered the timestamp into my recorder. Local 1942, sector Delta 9, then adjusted exposure until the image held shape. A fragment of reflected light skimmed along what looked like an arm, then vanished. My camera caught 3 frames before the signal cut out, the feed collapsing into digital snow. I tapped the screen. Once, twice, nothing. It wasn't malfunction, it was interference. Whatever it was, it carried its own kind of gravity, bending both air and instrument toward silence. I should have withdrawn, but curiosity steadied my hands. I logged the incident manually in my field journal, noting barometric pressure, wind speed, GPS coordinates. The air itself seemed heavier, a subtle hum beneath the silence, like the pause before an earthquake. I replayed the audio later, buried in static. A low resonance pulsed every 4 seconds, consistent with movement, something taking deliberate, measured steps beyond visible range. When I sent a fragment of the telemetry to command, the response came quicker than expected. Captain Rourke's voice came through, clipped and restrained. Cease unsanctioned data collection. All anomalous readings to be filed through intelligence chain only. His tone wasn't anger, it was fear wrapped in authority. I knew that tone from years under his command. It meant something bigger than us was watching. His next line confirmed it. You don't want to be attached to this, not officially. Career jeopardy spoken like a warning, but also a plea. The official logs that followed omitted every relevant metric. The anomaly field became environmental distortion. The photographs flagged unverified optical noise. I printed the images anyway, grainy, blurred, but unmistakably enormous, and slipped them into the sealed dossier marked Dossier, Valley, Master, and Sea. The contrast between what I'd seen and what they'd allow on record split cleanly down the middle. Light versus shadow, truth versus preservation. When I looked back toward the ridge that night, nothing stirred. Yet the valley didn't feel empty. It felt observed. And somewhere beyond the visible, the shadow was waiting, patient, deliberate, and unwilling to stay myth for long. The morning after the sighting, the bass was louder than usual. Voices clipped, printers humming, boots tracing circles of bureaucracy. Discovery doesn't echo evenly. It distorts through command like a tremor through glass. My report from the previous night had vanished from the shared directory, replaced by a placeholder file labeled pending verification. The metadata told a different story. Deleted at 2:06, re-uploaded at 02:08 by an administrative account that didn't exist in our rotation. Control versus ethics had never felt so literal. I walked the chain, file by file. Logistics denied seeing my transmission logs. Intelligence said the review queue was temporarily frozen. Rourke avoided my eyes in the corridor, offering a half-sentence about system errors before switching topics to weather patterns. The frictions were small but cumulative. A misfiled requisition request here, a delayed satellite pass there, each delay disguised as procedure. When systems start erasing themselves, you learn which silences are chosen. My ethics pressed against protocol like a bruise. The valley wasn't just anomaly, it was evidence, and evidence deserved preservation. Yet the order from above was unmistakable. Contain, redact, forget. I reopened the cryptic briefing from weeks before, the one tagged UN-sanctioned encounters. This time I noticed a footer I'd missed. Archive source, Ojai secure, revision 2, meaning there was a first version somewhere, scrubbed or locked away. The open loop from that file pulsed in my thoughts, a reminder that this had all been seen before. I spent the rest of the night cross-referencing timestamps from deleted files with system maintenance schedules. Every deletion aligned perfectly with low staff intervals, 1 to 3 a.m., as if the system itself had learned to move in darkness. By dawn, I knew the truth was slipping faster than I could archive it. The ripple wasn't a single act of censorship. It was institutional reflex. And in that reflex, I caught the outline of fear, not of the beings, but of exposure. Somewhere, behind locked doors and polished briefings, someone had decided that knowing was more dangerous than not. By the third week, the mission had mutated, officially still reconnaissance, unofficially a damage control sweep. What began as observation turned into containment. Orders grew terse, schedules tighter, and the silence thicker. Controlled versus chaotic, that was the rhythm now. Every line of command claimed oversight, yet no one seemed to own responsibility. Fuel requests were denied without reason. Our supply drops arrived half-empty, rations cut under the label of efficiency adjustments. The realism of scarcity sharpened everything. Fuel gauges flirting with empty, water reserves rationed by the ounce, batteries charged off vehicle alternators while engines idled in thin mountain air. Each logistic delay translated to another risk in the field, but none of that stopped the missions. If anything, the deprivation seemed deliberate. We pushed deeper into the northeastern valleys, where radio contact fractured and the terrain itself turned adversary. Snowmelt turned the passes into quicksand, and static swallowed entire transmissions mid-sentence. The team began to split along invisible lines, those who wanted to know what we were hunting, and those who only wanted to go home. One night, under the ghost-white wash of floodlights, we found the first clear trace, a footprint, nearly 1.5 meters long, impressed into frozen soil like a monument. The light caught in its edges, refracting ice crystals into a halo that made it seem almost sacred. That was the motif made flesh, illumination cutting through darkness, proof resisting burial. I photographed it from 3 angles, logged the coordinates, and sent the data through an encrypted channel directly to my offsite archive. I didn't trust the base servers anymore. The pushback escalated the next day. My commanding officer, Major Riley, summoned me to the comms tent. "You're off primary detail," he said, tone level but eyes tired. "Operational realignment. Nothing personal." It was always nothing personal when the truth came too close. I asked what had triggered the change. He hesitated, then admitted quietly, "Too much visibility on your last transmission. Higher channels are watching." That night, I reviewed the transmission logs again. My encrypted message had been intercepted en route, time-stamped to 2247. The same moment, our field generator surged and fried half the equipment. The two events weren't coincidence. They were containment protocols. I wasn't supposed to send proof. Still, I couldn't let the silence win. I rechecked my sat phone, rerouted the signal through a civilian relay, and resent the data under a false identifier. If truth was light, then every suppression was just another layer of shadow trying to snuff it out. As the convoy prepared for extraction, a storm rolled in, thunder echoing between the peaks, visibility dropping to nothing, chaos swallowing control. I stayed outside a little longer, watching the flicker of our perimeter lamps against the encroaching dark. For the first time, I realized the real risk wasn't dying out there. It was disappearing into official memory, rewritten and redacted until even the mountains forgot we'd ever been. By the time the reports reached my desk, the storm had cleared, but the data hadn't. What looked like chaos on the surface began to resolve under repetition. Each sighting, each unexplained tremor, blackout, or transmission cut aligned too cleanly with the same three valleys: terrain versus anomaly, order hiding inside disorder. I spread the satellite maps across my bunk, tracing the coordinates in pencil like fault lines. The marks formed a triangle, uneven but deliberate. The same geometry appeared in the intercepted comm logs, coded phrases recurring every 7 days: perimeter echo, thermal void, non-standard altitude. They were breadcrumbs for anyone willing to read between the noise. The question was whether the signal was warning us off or drawing us in. I refined the strategy the only way I could, by cross-referencing the night vision logs against elevation maps. At 2,300 hours on March 18th, the first anomaly spiked near an abandoned telemetry tower. Exactly 1 week later, same time, same altitude, 30 miles away. A rhythm too consistent to be random. I printed overlays until my small desk disappeared beneath layers of ink and topography. Each sheet smelled faintly of toner and fatigue. The artifacts told a story no briefing dared to. A pulse moving beneath the mountains, drawing power from natural fractures, surfacing only when the valley's shadow aligned with the ridgelines. Light and geometry working in tandem just as before. I realized then that the footprints, the silences, even the weather shifts weren't isolated incidents. They were choreography. Riley's realignment orders now read like containment choreography too, keeping us circling but never converging. Someone knew this pattern long before we did. Someone wanted it preserved but unseen. That night, I redrew the maps on tracing paper and pinned them to the tent wall. Under the red glow of my headlamp, the lines pulsed like veins. The pattern didn't just connect points on a map, it connected motives, cover-ups, and fear. I stared until the paper blurred and finally whispered, more to myself than anyone else. "Notice the patterns yourself. What would you do?" Outside, the valley wind carried back a sound, low, resonant, almost human. The kind of echo you feel before you hear. I logged the time, 2:13, another data point. Another fragment of a design too big to name. Yet, somewhere between the lines and the silence, I could feel it beginning to take shape. By dawn, order became my armor. Every map, every photograph, every encrypted log was laid out in rows on the cargo table, evidence against the chaos that had stalked us for months. The tent smelled of dust and solder from the portable uplink. The hum of generators filled the air like a heartbeat. Silence and control. Temporary, but mine to hold. The artifacts no longer contradicted each other. They formed a chain. Satellite stills from February 9th showed movement too large for any known vehicle. Telemetry confirmed pressure waves radiating outward, not inward. Even the old mission briefings, those I'd once dismissed as bureaucratic filler, now carried weight. The phrase that had haunted me since the start, unsanctioned encounters, wasn't metaphor or rumor. It was the military's coded admission that something beyond protocol had entered the field. The open loop from that briefing snapped shut with precision. Back then, I'd taken containment protocols to remain off-book as standard clearance language. Now, matched against the sightings, it read like confession. The same clearance level that forbade documentation had quietly ensured the encounters would never be believed. They hadn't denied what we saw. They'd buried it beneath classification. Order versus disorder, two languages of the same operation. I chose to translate the latter. I rechecked the field recorder batteries, recalibrated the drone lens, and printed a new mission slate stamped Field Recon Alpha Last. I didn't plan to file it. I planned to finish it. There was a discipline in preparation, a calm, no field manual taught. I walked the perimeter, marking new GPS points, testing radio range. Each click of the transmitter was a metronome counting down to the inevitable face-to-face. My team called it superstition, but to me it was ritual, turning fear into sequence, doubt into data. At 1,300 hours, Riley appeared in the comm tent. His eyes were steady, but the skin at his temples had aged 10 years since Kabul. "You're really going back out there?" he asked. I nodded. He hesitated before saying, "You don't understand what's under those valleys." I answered evenly, "No one does, because we keep deciding not to." His silence was an admission. When he left, I gathered the documents into a single waterproof binder. The weight of it felt heavier than paper should, like a ledger of every omission and denial. I slid it into my pack beside the keys from Section 4's dig site, literal and metaphorical access to the hidden truth. By dusk, the valley light dimmed to that thin gold hush before nightfall. I checked my rifle but left the safety on. This wasn't a mission for noise. The confrontation ahead would be measured not by firepower, but by clarity. Somewhere in those shadows, order and disorder would finally meet, and this time, I would be the one holding the light. The night I met them, the air was too still. Even the wind, the one constant whisper through Afghanistan's high valleys, had gone mute, as if the mountains themselves were holding breath. My mission log reads 21:47 hours. Coordinates 34 degrees north, 69 degrees east. Temperature, 4 degrees Celsius. Visibility, partial. Dust interference high. I recorded the details mechanically, clinging to procedure like armor. Yet even before the first tremor beneath the ground, I knew protocol wouldn't save me. The valley floor stretched ahead like a hollow lung. My flashlight's beam barely reached 20 feet before dissolving into haze. The drone feed stuttered, its thermal imaging flickering between bands of orange and void. Then came the sound, low, resonant, more felt than heard. It wasn't a roar, not yet. More like pressure collapsing inward, a frequency beyond human register. I noted the timestamp, 21:53, the last normal minute of the mission. Light versus shadow, that old motif haunted me even here. I raised the floodlight module and swept it across the ridgeline. The beam carved through dust, finding the contours of something vast, too symmetrical to be rock, too still to be alive, until it moved. A single shift, like an eclipse sliding across the valley floor. My body reacted before thought. Weapon up, breath locked, but instinct collided with awe, precision with fear. At 21:55, telemetry spiked. The being stepped forward, slow, deliberate. Dust streamed around its legs like smoke pulled by gravity. It wasn't giant in the way myths promise. It was proportionally human, scaled beyond reason. Skin the color of sand under moonlight, eyes reflecting faint light like glass over fire. Every rational instinct screamed to retreat, but another part of me, something primal and wordless, refused to move. The silence broke, not by sound, but by resonance. My comms crackled with static, though I'd switched to record-only mode. Through the interference, a voice, not speech, but rhythm, pulsed in waves. Later, reviewing the logs, I found each pulse registered at precise intervals, 3.2 seconds apart. Telemetry didn't recognize it as sound. It labeled it ground echo anomaly. Yet the pattern matched heartbeat spacing at resting human rate. I tried to speak. Training dictated identification. declaration, but the words thinned out before leaving my throat. The being tilted its head slightly, as if listening not to me, but to the hum of my fear. My finger brushed the trigger, then eased away. There was power in restraint, in witnessing rather than reacting. That realization, light inside shadow, became the moment the mission changed from confrontation to comprehension. At 21:59, the drone stabilized enough to capture 3 still frames. Frame 1213. The being half-turned, revealing an array of markings, carved or natural, impossible to tell, running down its arms. Frame 1214. An outline of a second figure in the background, towering but less distinct. Frame 1215. The floodlight flickering out. Power drain logged simultaneously on all systems. The valley went black. I remember the seconds after that darkness, like inverted lightning, bright in memory, though no light existed. A presence loomed behind me, the sound of shifting gravel magnified until it drowned every other sense. I turned slowly, my breath syncopated with the telemetry's failing rhythm. There it was, closer now. The eyes caught faint starlight, turning gold for a heartbeat, then fading to ember. 21 hours, 59 minutes, and 43 seconds, the last entry before the systems failed. My wrist recorder captured one final audio fragment. A single inhalation, mine or theirs I couldn't tell. Then nothing. Silence and shadow, yet it felt less like threat and more like recognition. Not prey and predator, observer and observed. When the floodlight returned 23 seconds later, the ridge was empty. No footprints, no heat residue, only a fine dust settling in the air, like ash after a quiet detonation. I logged everything: time, coordinates, environmental readings, with the precision of a man proving to himself he hadn't imagined it. At 22:11, I transmitted the data packet to HQ. 2 hours later, it disappeared from the system entirely. I kept one backup drive offline, tucked inside the lining of my field jacket. The images remain imperfect, grainy, incomplete, but real. Proof that light, once revealed, cannot unlearn its own reach. That night in the valley, silence met its reflection and became something else entirely. By first light, the decision had been made. Extraction under controlled terms. Survival versus exposure dictated every move. The valley, still echoing with the memory of the encounter, demanded precision. One misstep could compromise both safety and the fragile evidence we carried. We loaded the packs carefully, each item cataloged and cross-checked. The field recorder, thermal logs, satellite stills, and the brass key from the previous dig site, a tactile reminder of the truths we had unlocked. The trek back to the forward base was measured, each step accounted for on GPS overlays and mission logs. I documented everything in real time, timestamps for pauses, atmospheric readings, and the faint tremors in the soil that suggested the beings had moved unseen. Every shadow along the ridges became both threat and artifact, a living margin note to our observations. Even the wind's direction was noted. It carried scents and sounds that could corroborate or contradict the field data later. When we radioed our position, command responded with clipped efficiency. Major Riley, his voice taut, acknowledged our extraction but questioned deviations from standard protocol. I sensed frustration in his tone. Not anger, not disbelief, but the weight of recognition. He knew the truth was too big for routine processing, yet too undeniable to dismiss. In that tension, I saw the human element, a man caught between fear of exposure and a reluctant respect for what we'd witnessed. Back at base, the artifacts were secured in separate evidence lockers. I re-verified the encrypted drive, ensuring each file had a corresponding log entry. Photos, telemetry, timestamps, even the PI report. The ritual of documentation became a shield. Each note, each labeled photo, a bulwark against denial. Frustration from command lingered in the air like static, yet beneath it was acknowledgement, the unspoken admission that the impossible had touched our operations and survived scrutiny. As the sun rose higher, painting the mountains in gold, I stepped outside to breathe. Survival was secured, evidence preserved, and the valley left behind, but not forgotten. The encounter had changed us all. And somewhere, in the tension between frustration and recognition, I understood that truth often requires retreat before it can fully advance. By mid-morning, the base hummed with familiar rhythm, yet everything felt subtly altered. Past mission chaos, the misfiled reports, delayed approvals, unacknowledged anomalies, now contrasted sharply against the clarity I had forged from weeks in the field. I spread the materials across my table. Official memos stamped classified, field notes meticulously dated, encrypted logs, and the thermal imaging stills that no one had dared to acknowledge. Each artifact was a small anchor, restoring structure to a mission that had once felt unmoored. I reviewed a memo from Captain Rourke, dated the 15th of June 2011, detailing unverified environmental disruptions, a phrase I had once overlooked. In juxtaposition with my field logs from February 2025, the anomalies aligned almost perfectly. Patterns emerged that were invisible in isolation. The footprints, the drone distortions, the low-frequency pulses. Cross-referencing the timestamps, 2:14, 1942, 21:55, revealed a deliberate rhythm, a choreography hidden within apparent disorder. Each piece became a testament to methodical observation, turning chaos into a framework of understanding. Strategic resilience grew in parallel with operational order. I cataloged every item in the dossier: Valley, Master, End Drive, annotating photos, satellite overlays, and telemetry in sequence. The brass key from the initial site, once a symbol of tentative access, now represented verification, the tangible point where observation met interpretation. My journal entries became layered with insight, cause, effect, implication. I no longer moved through the valley with blind curiosity. I moved with calibrated attention, my internal compass aligned to both risk and revelation. Even minor frictions, frustrated comms, delayed supply requests, were now data points rather than irritants. They revealed the limits of human bureaucracy and the necessity of redundancy in evidence gathering. Each corrected anomaly, each logged observation, reinforced a growing internal shift: competence over chaos, patience over impulse, and strategic foresight over reactive instinct. By afternoon, I could sit back and trace the narrative from beginning to present. The mission had transformed from a series of disjointed responses into a structured operation, its story coherent and defensible. In that reframing, I found an unexpected equilibrium, a calm strength born of meticulous effort, the kind that turns setbacks into strategy and exposure into preparation. The valley remained, quiet and enigmatic, but I had learned not only to navigate its shadows, but to read the light they cast. By the time I returned to headquarters, the tension that had followed us through every ridge and valley had distilled into a single, manageable weight. Publicly, everything remained silent. Official channels carried only standard updates, mission codes, and the occasional sanitized progress report. Yet privately, I carried a dossier that could not be ignored, a ledger of evidence, timestamps, photos, and telemetry that proved the encounters beyond dispute. The contrast between public silence and private triumph was a quiet kind of victory, one that required no applause, only precision. I scheduled the meeting through proper channels, ensuring the chain of command was documented and traceable. Major Riley, Captain Rourke, and 2 senior intelligence officers assembled in the debrief room, their faces masks of neutral expectation. I placed the dossier, Valley, Master, that ink drive at the center of the table, alongside printed stills and annotated logs. I did not speak first. I let the artifacts do the work. Light versus shadow again. The images illuminated truths that words alone could not convey. The first response was hesitation. Riley's hand hovered over the drive, then withdrew. Rourke's eyes flickered to the photographs, then back to the logs. The tension was human, not theatrical. Fear of career jeopardy, concern over exposure, and a sudden recognition that the impossible was now undeniable. I outlined the procedural path calmly. Formal notifications through intelligence oversight, debriefs documented in triplicate, and verification through archival units. Every step grounded in legal and procedural realism, leaving no room for emotional theatrics to distort the record. When I spoke, it was measured. The anomalies are verifiable, Every timestamp, every reading, every image aligns across independent artifacts. Operational integrity is intact, but continued denial will only compromise accountability. No melodrama, no anger, just clarity. The room shifted in response, the weight of facts outweighing personal discomfort. Riley exhaled, a subtle admission of both frustration and acknowledgement. We finalized chain of command notifications. Emails were sent, signed, and archived. Debrief forms were completed, each initialed and time-stamped, confirming that procedural transparency had been maintained. The act of documentation itself became a boundary, clear, enforceable, and immutable. I stepped back, letting the evidence sit between us like a ledger of truth. The status reversal was complete. I held nothing over anyone's head. The victory was quiet, surgical, and permanent. By the end, the room felt lighter, not because the anomaly had been contained, but because the balance had shifted. Public silence remained, but private triumph carried weight. I packed the remaining artifacts, ensuring duplicates were stored in secure off-site locations. Each step was deliberate, each action a safeguard. The truth had been acknowledged, accountability reinforced, and boundaries set without spectacle. In that quiet, I realized the final measure of strategy was not in confrontation alone, but in leaving the record unassailable and the lesson indelible. Weeks after the debriefs, the valley was no longer a place I visited physically, but it remained present in every decision I made. Light and shadow, the motif that had guided every observation, every hesitation, every recording, still threaded through my thoughts. The unknowns lingered, stubborn and vast, but I had learned to navigate them without surrendering to fear. My future-facing plan was deliberate. Continue gathering evidence, secure artifacts, and maintain a ledger of anomalies, ensuring the record survived even if others refused to acknowledge it. The mission's cadence had shifted from survival to stewardship. I reviewed the dossiers one last time, cross-referencing timestamps, photographs, and telemetry against the updated logs from intelligence oversight. Each artifact became both anchor and compass, a way to measure truth against silence. Where shadows had once concealed, now the light I had cultivated, digital, photographic, human, revealed contours, previously denied. The valley itself remained enigmatic, its vast figures hidden in mist and distance, yet the recordings, the notes, the keys, and the layered documentation ensured that what had been seen would never vanish into myth. The human side of the antagonists remained visible too. Riley and Rourke, once obstacles, were now partners in tacit understanding. Their frustrations had shifted into cautious acknowledgement. They understood the boundaries I had drawn. Truth documented, authority respected, and personal integrity preserved. The tension between secrecy and disclosure had become manageable, a dynamic calibrated to maintain both operational security and ethical accountability. I set my plan into motion. Off-site backups of the dossier were encrypted and stored in rotating safe locations. Field logs continued under the same meticulous attention, each entry a testament to disciplined observation. I scheduled future reconnaissance with calculated precision, mindful of fuel constraints, environmental hazards, and operational windows. Every step forward was grounded in realism, yet oriented toward the long-term arc, to witness, document, and preserve. And then finally the statement that would define the work, the ethos, the quiet power accrued through every shadowed ridge and every flicker of light. I don't chase legends, I record them. It was not a boast, nor a threat. It was identity distilled into a single sentence, the culmination of every choice, risk, and observation. In the quiet moments that followed, I allowed myself a glance at the maps pinned to my wall, the satellite overlays, the annotated photos, the ledger of impossible encounters. The light traced over valleys, ridges, and shadows, revealing a truth that would outlast me. I understood at last that legacy was not in glory, nor in exposure, but in the careful, unyielding documentation of what others refused to see. And with that, I returned to the work, confident that even in silence, the record would speak.